In the summer of 1485, tensions rose across England that had not been felt in generations. For decades, the realm had been torn apart by the dynastic struggle known as the Wars of the Roses, a brutal contest between the houses of York and Lancaster. King Richard III, the last Yorkist monarch, sat uneasily upon a throne he had seized only 2 years earlier. His claim, though legally argued, came after his brother, Edward IV's death in 1483. Edward's young sons, rightful heirs, vanished inside the Tower of London, and their uncle seized power. Richard was stained in the eyes of many by the disappearance of his nephews. To some, Richard was a capable ruler, but to others, a usurper, a man without honor, a child killer. Across the field, a challenger had emerged, Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian exile with a thin but legitimate blood claim, and powerful allies. Henry, aiming to capture the English throne from this usurper, had landed in Wales in early August 1485, his small army bolstered by Welsh supporters, French allies, and disaffected English nobles. As he marched east, more men joined his cause. Yet he remained outnumbered by a factor of perhaps 2 to 1. King Richard, a seasoned commander and a veteran of the Wars of the Roses, gathered a formidable host, perhaps 10 to 12,000 strong, and moved to intercept this threat. Richard chose his ground well, deploying his forces atop Ambion Hill, a strong defensive position overlooking marshy terrain. But the most dangerous uncertainty on the field was neither army. It was the Stanley family. Thomas Stanley, 1st Earl of Derby, and his brother, Sir William Stanley, commanded several thousand men. They had not yet declared for either side. Crucially, Thomas Stanley was stepfather to Henry Tudor, but had long served the Yorkist regime. Their banners stood apart, watching and waiting. The stage was set on the Bosworth Field in Leicestershire. John de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, had the honours of commanding the Lancastrian vanguard. He led Henry's forces forward in a tight formation, refusing to spread thin, a deliberate tactic to prevent being outflanked. Soldiers of a mixed variety made up the ranks. Some heavily armoured men-at-arms and noblemen were covered in mail and plate from head to toe. These would have been some of the wealthiest and most battle-hardened troops in Henry's ranks. Other, less wealthier soldiers wore little to no armour, perhaps just a helmet and some mail coverings. Upon their advance, Henry's men were harassed by enemy cannon fire, which was not accurate, making it quite ineffective. The weapons utilized that day were wildly diverse, from axes, maces, swords, poleaxes, spears, hammers. Possibly every medieval weapon for the period saw battle that day. The Duke of Norfolk, commanding the Yorkist right, gave the order for his longbowmen to loose their shafts into the oncoming enemy. Henry's heavily armoured troops shrugged off the incoming fire, but his lighter troops were not so fortunate. Norfolk's divisions advanced downhill to meet them. The fighting was savage and confused. Steel weaponry crashed against armour and tore through exposed flesh. Henry's vanguard was locked into a heated exchange with Norfolk's right. Richard used this opportunity to send a message to Stanley, to attack Henry's position immediately. Richard, reminding Stanley that if he refused, Richard would execute his son, Lord Strange, who he held hostage. Stanley, seemingly unnerved by this threat, simply replied, "My lord, I have other sons." Infuriated, Richard gave the order to execute Lord Strange, but his officers hesitated, stating battle was imminent, and it would be more convenient to carry out the execution afterwards. Whilst Henry had also sent messengers to Stanley asking him to declare his allegiance. The reply was vague and evasive. The Stanleys stated they would naturally come after Henry had given orders to his army and arranged them for battle. It could be argued that Stanley was simply waiting to pick the winning side. Once it was obvious which side held the clear advantage, then Stanley's force would have swooped in, securing the victory, thus protecting the interests of his own house. The violent melee continued on, with Henry's men demonstrating more heart and commitment to the fight, thus giving them the momentum. This becomes more abundantly clear when handfuls of troops from Norfolk's division opt to leave the struggle and withdraw to safety. Even with Oxford's success, Richard still held the advantage. His main body remained intact, and Northumberland's reserve force on Richard's left flank had neither moved nor yet engaged. If committed properly, it could outflank and crush Henry's smaller army. But Northumberland did not move. Whether by hesitation, poor positioning, or quiet treachery, his troops stood idle as the battle unfolded. Henry knew time as well as numbers was not on his side. He made a desperate attempt to ride toward Stanley's forces and plead for their aid in person. Richard, miraculously catching sight of Henry Tudor's movement, exposed behind his lines with a small retinue, made a bold and desperate decision. Rather than fight a grinding battle, he would strike directly at his rival and end the war in a single blow. The king led a cavalry charge downhill. It was a fearsome sight. Richard, a hardened warrior, cut through Henry's standard-bearer, Sir William Brandon, and came within striking distance of Henry himself. For a moment, it seemed the gamble might succeed. Having been almost killed in the charge by Richard, Henry dismounted his horse and took refuge within the ranks of his bodyguards. His heavy knights formed a defensive perimeter around his position and fought fiercely to keep Richard's men at bay. Realizing that Henry Tudor's standard-bearer continued holding his banner, signaling that Henry was still alive and in the fight, and now that Richard was exposed and out in the open, the Stanleys acted swiftly. At the critical moment, Sir William Stanley's forces surged into the fray, not for the King Richard, but against him. It seemed perhaps Thomas Stanley didn't take too lightly to the threat of having his son, Lord Strange, executed. The Stanleys committed all of their cavalry into a swift and merciless charge, aimed directly at the Yorkist position. Over 1,000 heavy cavalry swarmed the Yorkist position, striking them from all directions. Richard's division was surrounded and forced to fight from all sides. The Yorkist men fought like cornered animals, fighting for their very lives. Even still, they were being slayed by the dozens. It was said that Richard was unhorsed, gathered himself, and rallied his dwindling soldiers, supposedly refusing to retreat. "God forbid that I retreat one step. "I will either win the battle as a king or die as one," the English king acclaimed. In the fighting, Richard's bannerman, Sir Percival Thirlwall, lost his legs, but held the Yorkist banner aloft until he was killed. The king's trusted advisor, Richard Ratcliffe, was also slain. Henry Tudor's official historian, Polydore Virgil, recorded that King Richard alone was killed fighting manfully in the thickest press of his enemies. Richard had come within a sword's length of Henry Tudor before being surrounded by William Stanley's men and killed. Richard III was the last English king to die in battle. Richard's forces disintegrated as news of his death spread. Northumberland and his men fled north on seeing the king's fate, and Norfolk was killed by the knight Sir John Savage in single combat. As the fighting ceased, the realities settled in. Henry was now King Henry VII. The Wars of the Roses, though not entirely extinguished, had effectively ended. With his victory, Henry would go on to unite the warring houses by marrying Elizabeth of York, founding the Tudor dynasty that would rule England for over a century. The precise death toll of the battle was not given, leading to summarize that hundreds on both sides may have fallen.